Hello everyone, good evening. This is OT Security Huddle and this is Shiv speaking. Today, this is episode 5 and we are going to talk about incident response in ICS. I can see that you would be hearing a lot of noise from my background, so I will take apologies from that you all in advance. There is festival going on in India and lots of fireworks going outside my apartment. Yeah, having said so, today we have Mike Holcomb along with Manjunath, who is a regular participant in OT Security Huddle. And Mike, as you know, all is a big celebrity on LinkedIn. He has been posting a lot lately, and he speaks very practical experience on OT security. And recently, he has conducted a free OT security training as well, which apparently was subscribed by more than 1,000 people. So that's what about Mike. You know all well him, and I have been seeing lots of comment that people are excited to hear you, Mike. And now I will just put my slide deck in front of you. So this would be the 5th episode. If you are joining it for first time, we have been doing it for past few months now. This is a regular stuff that we do on incident ICS security. And before this particular episode, we had done sessions on OT security awareness and specifics of risk assessment in OT security. So you can go to our YouTube channel if you really want to watch them again. And moving forward, we will be doing lots of technical stuff on OT security as such. So this is about us. We have our guest Mike Holcomb, Manjunath, and myself. I will yield the mic in a bit to Mike. To maybe he will just introduce you all briefly, though you may all know him from different platforms. But yeah, since he's joining it first time here, maybe it makes a sense to speak a quick brief about him. And before we begin, this is a quick disclaimer that whatever we are sharing here, it's our personal opinion, nothing to do with the organization that we are working with. And we are nowhere sponsored and associated with any organization so far. Yeah, so now I yield you to Mike. And before that, a big thank you for accepting this invite and then agreeing to give a deep dive session on the practical aspect of incident response. People are really excited about this particular topic, and I see in previous huddles when we ask people's opinion, this was one of the topic that they ask us to talk on. And really glad that you are bringing in lots of practical aspect into it. I was speaking to you yesterday and last week as well, and you told me that you are recently been participating in a tabletop exercise as well. So this brings a real excitement, not only in the people who are watching online, but also in me, that what is there that will unfold in the session today. Yeah, now handling over to you, but big thank you again, Manjunath, to you, as well as Mike for joining the session.
Yeah, thanks, Shiv. I appreciate it. And hi, everybody, and thanks to Manjunath as well. So thank you both for the invite. We've had a couple great conversations over the last couple days, so I appreciate the invite, and thanks for everybody for tuning in and joining the call today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Holcomb. I am the floor fellow for cybersecurity, and I'm also the global lead for industrial control cybersecurity there. So if you're not familiar with floor, and I didn't know what Floor did before before I went to work there. I got very lucky with this job. We're one of the largest engineering companies in the world, and so when we talk about engineering, procurement, construction, so EPC companies, if you've ever heard the term, so we build and sometimes operate some of the largest industrial control environments in the world. So my largest project right now is, and for the company, and is for LNG facility in Canada for Shell. And it's a $50 billion project with it. It's like over 50 million IOs, just to kind of set the stage and size and scope, right? So some of the large environments, and so I get to work with a lot of incredible engineers from all over the world. So I get to learn so much. I'm traditionally an IT cybersecurity practitioner, and I've been doing cybersecurity since day one, pretty much, in working in IT, which was really some of my first jobs, and got into industrial control security when Stuxnet was announced back in 2010, and that really started me on my journey. And I said, really happened to luck into this job about 12 and a half years ago. And so it was probably a little over a decade before I realized, yeah, we probably have some control systems around floor. And again, I've been able to bring my IT cybersecurity knowledge to the engineering side, and at the same time get to learn from all these incredible engineers to really be able to think like an engineer, which is really necessary in truly protecting control system in OT environments. But um, so that's, yeah, recap a little bit of my background. So hopefully that resonates with some of you, whether you're coming from IT or from OT. I'm sure there's quite a mix, a little bit of everybody. But we wanted to talk about, with incident response in control system environments. I think sometimes, like many things in control system environments, there's not a lot of information out there, or there's a lot of people that might have the knowledge but don't necessarily talk about it, which is definitely one of the reasons why I started, posting information on LinkedIn, was to be able to share with people and kind of demystify this idea that cybersecurity and control systems is like it's magical, or right, it's top secret, and it's special, and only a certain number of people can understand it, and it is very special. Right, but it's not not in the way where it shouldn't be accessible to those that want to work in the field. But um, with that said, and we talk about, um, in the IT realm, we talk about, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when we talk about incidents and breaches. Right? The idea that you are going to be compromised. Right? It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where in the world you live, what company you work for, your organization is going to be breached, right? And it's just a matter of time. If it's not today, it's tomorrow. If it's not tomorrow, it's next week or next month or next year, so on. I think you get the idea. And I firmly believe the same applies to, industrial control networks as well, where it's just a matter of when, right? And so a big part of what I work on, with some of our clients, and with others that I get to talk with and work with, is really spreading that awareness around, helping owners and operators understand they are a target, right? And they are going to have an incident, a cybersecurity incident, one day, more than likely. Again, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but it is coming. And so a big part of, the focus in securing these environments is making sure that at the end of the day that we have an incident response plan in place, bare minimum, to at least understand what are we going to do when something bad happens. So that does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So, but yes, and that's really kind of my kind of the starting point, really, is as we kind of look at incident response and control system environments. To me, it's like many aspects of control systems, versus IT, right? There's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of differences as well. So if we keep both of the similarities and the differences in mind, then I think we're set up to succeed. And so that's, really what kind of what we wanted to talk through today is, what does that incident response process look like? Overall, it doesn't really look that much different between IT and OT, except you have to then remember, in OT, what environment are we living in? And that's, it's much different if I'm, in an IT general excuse me, response situation, where most IT networks, right, are very, very similar. They have a lot of similarities. Whereas in the OT world, not only do you have these kind of traditional IT components where most of the cybersecurity incidents occur, like on Windows servers that are acting as maybe your data historians or your domain controllers that you have in the OT and network, or engineering workstations, right? Anything running Windows versus, so we look at that. But then it's also a matter of, well, what is that facility doing? Is it a power plant? Is it a refinery? Well, what type of refinery? If it's a chemical, well, what type of chemical refinery, right? Is it a mine? Is it a train? And the list goes on and on. So every environment is unique, right? And so that's again, a big focus is remembering, really. And this is something we'll get to when we talk about kind of in the outline with the slides, but making sure that you get the right people in the room, right? And when you're looking at responding to the incident, when you're planning for incident response, when you're working through designing your program, it's just not cybersecurity people in the room. You have to get the engineers. You have to get the people that are doing maintenance. Get the people that run the facility, right? Get the people even from the control room and the technicians in the room, because they understand how that facility runs, whether it's a brand new facility or it's 30 years old, right? You want the people in the room that understand how that plant or that facility is designed, how it runs, right? They're going to understand, right? And this is really key when something suspicious is happening, right? We want to get someone to say something, right? That something just seems off. And it doesn't matter if it's a cursor moving on a screen, or maybe there's a turbine that just is sounds slightly different than normal, right? It could be, it's an indication of something has changed, right? Maybe it's a physical issue with that turbine. Maybe it's the result of a compromise, right? We don't know, right? But we need somebody to report that something suspicious is happening, to then investigate, to then determine, is this something that oh, it's a physical issue that needs to be addressed? Is it a cyber issue that needs to be addressed, right? So there's a lot of questions, but a big part of incident response is getting people to report, right, suspicious activity or things that just seem off. So that way we can then investigate to understand, is something going on here or not. So I know I'm probably jumping jumping ahead a
Yeah.
lot, but and then you know and then talking about IR. So uh,
Yeah. So yeah, you may just let me know when I need to move on the slide. Sorry for that I'm taking the control, but yeah.
oh yeah, no, you're
Yeah.
good. I didn't know yeah, how much we go back and forth, or I don't necessarily like
Yeah.
always doing the lecture thing. So but
Absolutely. Yeah, but one
so,
thing I like that you mentioned here in the discussion is the importance of identification of the incident itself. Because sometimes, typically in the OT environment, people use these machines for 20 or 25 years or more, and
yeah, definitely.
very often it is assumed that maybe the issues are because of the legacy element. The system is now not capable to handle much of load, so there is due investigation that is required. So first thing that we need to train is, if there is something anomalous which they are observing in the system, do report that to the security team or the IT team or maybe the OT team that is there in the plant, and then take it from there. So that's very good element that I liked about what you just now talked, Mike.
Yeah, it's one of those main focuses, and just it was really interesting. So I spent 2 days, the last 2 days, in Nashville, Tennessee, kind of in the middle of the United States. Kind of, for those of you not familiar, it's the music capital of the United States, or they say the music capital of the world. But and so we had the ICS cybersecurity summit there, and it was actually a really great group. And we had a roundtable yesterday that was led by Paul Shaver. So Paul, he runs the OT program for Mandiant, right? So they're one of the largest, incident response organizations in the world, and the vast majority of that conversation wasn't around necessarily incident response. It was kind of like where you're touching. It was really on incident detection, right? So it's a lot of organizations, you might even have an incident response program, even if it's a paragraph that just says, you know, call, you know, Dragos or call Mandiant or call, company XYZ, when you have an incident. Maybe that's their only plan. And at least they have a plan. There's a lot of
Yeah.
organizations out there that don't, right? But then it's really a question of kind of like you're talking about, it's how do we, go into response mode if we're not actually looking for issues, right? How do we know there's even suspicious activity, or if someone knows or sees suspicious activity, but they're not letting us know, right? How do we know to go into investigation and response mode? And so there's a much larger conversation about, how we do things like incident detection in OT, and focusing on, and think that we'll definitely touch on this again, but one big part of the awareness efforts is just like in IT, as you try in IT environments, the same as in OT. That, and this is even true going back to the Ukrainian blackouts in 2015. It wasn't a intrusion detection sensor, right? Or a SIM going off with an alarm saying something bad is happening, you need to investigate. It was somebody seeing something that just looked weird, right? With Ukraine, right? You had the technicians who were sitting there watching the attackers move the mouse on the HMI to flip the breakers to turn off the power. And
Okay.
so that was probably a very obvious case, right? Something really strange is happening, right? And they were like, let's get somebody on the phone right away, right? So they did the right thing, right? But that's, again, kind of, again, not to get too far ahead, but in you
Yeah.
bringing up the process, it's identification really is one of the large areas that gets mostly left out in ICS environments today, right? Because we can talk about being prepared, and that's, I think, a big part of what we're going to focus on in the conversation today, right? Is making sure we have an incident response program first of all, right? We understand how to react, right? Who do we call? When do we call? And do we have reporting requirements, right? That's especially something we see evolving a lot in the United States, right? So depending on where you are in the world and the different type of environment that you work in, you might have countries from that law, the state, the region, right, the district, the city on reporting your cybersecurity incidents. And then there's a whole conversation around, well, how do you define a cybersecurity incident? But so we have to prepare, right? We have to have a program. We have to help our employees understand how to respond, right? We need to do the training, right? We need to help not only from an awareness perspective to get people, of course, to report, but also for those people that are needing to understand how to respond, right? And this is where it gets really interesting, because this is very different when you move from organization to organization, and it goes to that, speaks really highly to the differences between IT and OT. And in some organizations, right, IT and OT do not talk to each other. And there's other organizations where I think the best case is they very much talk to each other and work really well together. And those are going to be the strongest, I always say, the strongest house, right, to be able to live in, right? Because you have both parties talking to each other, and then everything in between, right?
Yeah.
But in industrial control environments, and this is something that Paul Shaver, stresses, and Mandiant, they always talk about the 99% rule. That the Mandiant 99% rule talks about in control system environments, 99% of your incidents involve traditional Windows assets. And so if you are in an environment where IT is not talking with OT, and this is nothing against OT engineers and automation professionals, they probably just don't have the experience working on Windows systems, let alone doing forensics in an incident situation, right? Very high pressure, trying to figure out what's happening and not going to have, understand what to do, in a timely manner. They're all very smart people. It's just not what they're trained on. So we need to make sure, that's part of that preparation. Make sure we have the people to be able to do the job. But I think that's one of the keys that get missed is 99% of the time, it's the Windows assets that are getting compromised, which makes sense if you think about it from an attacker perspective. If I'm an attacker or if I'm doing a pen test in an environment, right, the first thing we'll typically do is we break into the IT environment, right? We take time, we move across Windows systems, and then find a way to transition into the OT network. And usually that's because there's a opening in the firewall that allows one Windows machine on the IT side to talk with a Windows machine on the OT side. And then once the attacker has a foothold, then they spread through the environment and they work through lower levels, for those of you that are familiar with the Purdue model, to where then they can interact with those systems that control the physical processes out in the real world. But so it's always an interesting conversation, but that's the one thing I think to stress before I go too far off, and I'll try and reel myself back in, is is again, it's another one of those examples where IT and OT have to talk with each other, right? And even you need to at least be talking with the IT cybersecurity folks, I think, in most organizations, right? Or you're hiring, at least hire, OT cybersecurity people, right? Or at least have, those outside vendors. If you have the budget, more power to you. But I know most OT organizations don't have unlimited budgets, right? And so they're not just able to go out and bring in Dragos to work, in their environment 24/7. But
Exactly.
yeah, so to reel myself back, sorry. So there's the incident response process. I go by the SANS. This is the SANS version. NIST also has one that we typically look to, at least in the United States, and I think it's very broadly applicable. But I like the SANS sixth stage, which they break it out a little bit further, right? Because it's all about preparation, making sure you have that program, which we'll talk about, but again, making sure we're in a position to even attempt to identify when malicious activity or at least suspicious activity is occurring on the network. So we know when there's an investigation that needs to take place.
Yeah, maybe
And
I'll
then, well,
just ask a question here, Mike.
yeah,
Your
what's that?
identification is very important, but since all the OT systems, we know what they're supposed to be doing, right? There is a defined application of these systems. So in such case, it
Yes.
shouldn't it be too easy to identify an incident? That the operator knows how my system should behave in a typical environment, and when
Mhm.
there is an anomaly or something unobvious happening, and the operator should get alarm. So why it is so difficult to identify an incident in ICS?
Why is it difficult? I think it's difficult because just people aren't looking,
Yeah,
right? Or I would say the other instance is they're not looking because they're in an older environment where they haven't been able to implement the systems to allow them to look, right?
yeah,
Meaning, and again, it's to take a step back, but Rob Lee focuses. I've been very fortunate to take Rob's SANS course, the grid course, which focuses on its 5 days with the world thought leader in control system cybersecurity, and it's all around incident detection and response. And the first thing he says out the gate is defense is doable, and it's doable because of being able to do incident detection and response. And in control system environments, right? These are much smaller environments than you have typically in IT. Right. Usually most organizations, they have very large IT
yeah,
organizations, or at least they're relatively larger in IT, right, than they have in OT. And like you were mentioning, Shiv, you mentioned that in OT we have, okay, we know the systems we have. It's a limited number of systems. We know how they operate, right? We know how they communicate, right? We know the commands that they send between the different systems. So when we look at, HMIs, the PLCs and PLCs, I mean, it's we know and we understand what to expect. So if we have systems, even just watching for, and this was one of the conversations that came up yesterday, even just watching net flow traffic, which is something that most organizations, I say, should be able to implement fairly easily. Most, right, is be able to implement something like net flow. So if all of a sudden I see an HMI trying to talk with a system it normally doesn't, right, that should throw up a red flag for an investigation. So defense
Absolutely.
is doable,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you
And
very well rightly said that defense is doable. That's the key. But yeah, understanding that anomalous thing and then the capability to identify it first is the starting point for all the incident response.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so once you get to that point, right, where we believe, there's something suspicion, and then we start to investigate and realize, oh, there's something more to this. That's when we go into true response mode and try to contain, right, the the attack, right, to limit, at least limit the attacker from spreading any further, gaining control over any other systems, and doing any more damage, to then where we go to eradication, where we can get them completely off the network and then get ideally the business back up and running if it was impacted. Right. So a lot of OT incidents, right? You might have an incident and the facility never was shut down. Right. The facility kept continuing to run. I think that's in most cases, and that's why we don't know about a lot of cybersecurity incidents in OT or ICS. It's only, when those larger operations are impacted, right? When Colonial Pipeline happened in the United States, right? That's we knew about that because where I live, you go to the gas station, they didn't have gas. That was how we knew about it, right? With Trident or Trisis, that was, same, a little bit different, right? But they wanted to share that visibility around that true incident that would, eventually threaten human life. So, but we don't hear about a lot of incidents in ICS OT, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the knowledge base is really small. Though these frameworks like MITRE ATTACK and MITRE DEFEND, ATTACK specifically, which is designed for ICS, we can find good references now. Similar to that, I also see, as you mentioned about the company Dragos, on their website, they have also put up the similar kind of MITRE ATTACK TTP for different groups that are targeting ICS. So that could also be a good input to understand where they are actually attacking the ICS systems.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's a great point. Yeah, any incident response program, excuse me, should involve, some type of, we talk about cyber intel, but at the end of the day, at its most basic component, it's just looking to see what's going on out there and seeing if it applies to your environment, right? If I'm let's say a pipeline operator in the United States, I want to see, are there any other attacks against pipeline operators in the United States, and if I'm protected against those. And what about more generically? Well, what about attacks against just pipeline operators, no matter where you are in the world? Because I should make sure I'm protected against those. And then I can look at, and then I can make it more general, right? What attacks are against just any organization, right? But you want to start, just looking to see what's out there, and you don't have to sign up or pay for a fancy Intel. Those are all great. Those are all nice. We're a huge Mandiant Intel customer. We spend a lot of money for it, and it's really fascinating. And I've looked at the Dragos feeds, and those are really fascinating. But you don't have to pay all that money to get started, right? It's just looking in the news and looking at the great resources that companies like Dragos and Mandiant make available for free. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, Mike, thanks for that. For taking us through the incident process. So I have a question like, in which step of this incident process do you see that, or maybe it's very critical, most critical for the ICS integrity, and why do you think that?
Say the question one more time.
Yeah. So which step in the incident process do you think that it is most critical?
I think the big ones are preparation. I think it's almost like they go in order of importance. Of course, it depends on who you ask, right? But it's for me, it's preparation, because the vast majority of organizations you see out there don't have a plan. They don't know what to do when something happens. From a cybersecurity perspective, if there was an incident or a breach, they have no plan. They don't have a person to call. They don't have somebody to escalate to. So if you don't have a plan in place, how do you not only keep the facility up and running, but even understand, if I keep the facility up and running, do I put people in harm's way, right? I potentially putting lives at danger? What about the environment around the facility, right? Am I putting it at risk? Um, yeah, so we have to have the plan, number one. And then, kind of like we were touching on earlier, a lot of organizations might have a plan, but they're not actually looking for incidents. They're not monitoring. So if you're not looking for incidents, then you're not going to typically find something. And that's why, you hear especially about OT environments these days. It reminds me of how IT was, 5, 10 years ago, where they find an attacker in the environment, and then you find the attacker's been there for 3 or 4 years. They've been there for 3 or 4 years because you're not looking. Because, like we were touching on earlier, it's not hard to find them in OT environments if you're looking for them. And so if you're looking for them, right, there's no reason they should be in your environment for 3 or 4 years. There's no excuse other than you're just not doing the work, right? And so, so I think those are definitely the first, the most important. And then the others, right? It's definitely important to be able to contain the attackers as quickly and efficiently as possible, right? It's definitely important to make sure also during that process, how did they get in the environment? Make sure we plug those holes so that they can't come back in. And then be able to, if we had to bring down operations, right, getting the facility back up and running, so that way it's producing whatever it produces, right? So it's all about, if you're, yes, the business, it's always about, making sure that the facility stays up and running. After, of course, making sure we're not putting lives and the environment in harm's way. And then, finally, that last step, which we didn't talk about, was, coming back, getting everybody on the incident response team that was involved in the same room, and look at, not only what went well, but also look at, hey, where are those opportunities for improvement? Where do we have gaps? Right? Where do we need to do more training? Where do we need to do, focus things like tabletop exercises, that can help get people the knowledge that they need for next time? Because it will happen again. It's just that we just don't know when. So
Yeah, exactly.
hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Mike.
No problem. No, that's a great question. So if we want to look at, excuse me. So if you want to go to the next slide, just kind of
Yeah, sure.
keep us on track for time. I think, when we talk about building the program, because this is where we were just mentioning, a lot of environments don't have programs today. And so again, we have to focus on what's important to the organization. So hopefully, right, you work in an environment, and this is almost all OT environments, right? That safety is number one, right? We want to make sure everybody goes home at the end of the day. And so you work in an environment where safety, for the people that are at that facility, in the environment in which that facility lives, stays safe and protected. So that's number one. And then we look at making sure that the facility stays up and running 24/7. And so to be able, again, to do those things, that's where we have to have the right people in the room, right? And that's, I think, we'll jump into it. So if we want to go to the next slide, I think let's kind of go into a little bit more detail, right? And this is what we were just talking about, right? We have to make sure that we focus on physical safety, environmental safety, and then operations. But it's one of those where if you ever suspect there's a danger or a risk to physical and environmental safety, you shut down the facility, right? If there's ever a question. And so Mike Holcomb cannot come into a power plant or a chemical refinery or a rail yard and make that determination, though, is if this attack happens, right? I I don't know, right, how that impacts the facility, right? But the engineers do, right? And so or the other team members in operations and maintenance, right, that run the facility, right? We can work with those engineers and technicians and other control system professionals, right, to be able to understand how the environment is impacted. Right. So I can understand the cyber attack perspective, but if I go into like a new environment, I need to work with the engineers to understand what's the true impact. That's why, on the next slide we talk about what, getting the right people in the room. That's why, again, it goes back to we have to have IT and OT, talking to each other.
Yeah.
And then we also bring in other people as needed, right? So there's probably a networking component involved, right? So we probably need to get somebody on the network team to do things like look at net flow data if it's available, or maybe turn on net flow capabilities on a network switch, right? We want to look at events from the firewall. Maybe the company, they don't have a SIM, right? Or maybe they have a SIM on the IT, but they don't have one in OT. So we need to be able to get the right people involved to be able to get that visibility to do our investigation. And then sometimes, right, what if it's a malicious insider, right? Or what if maybe it's not a malicious insider, but it's just an employee doing stupid things that they're not supposed to. Right? We had a client one time that one of their operators thought it would be a good idea to bring in their Xbox and could hook it up to a monitor in the control room. Like, I thought that was a great idea, right? So there's definitely an HR issue that has to be addressed there, right? Legal, especially if there's reporting requirements, right? And going out to make sure, when we engage law enforcement as well. And law enforcement really isn't going to, if really, be able to help in a lot of these situations. And so that's where you're really left to our own devices and working with those providers out there like Dragos, Mandiant, maybe some of the other boutique firms that are out there that understand OT response, right? And there aren't many, even at a global level. So, communications, right? How do we communicate not only internally but externally? Right? What if we had a breach? Think Colonial Pipeline, where it is visible to the world. How do we communicate with our customers? How do we communicate with our shareholders? Right? That's part of the PR, the public relations aspect. Right? But for me, it's I worry about those things because it's part of the job. I'm also our IR team lead at Floor, but for me, at the end of the day, it's making sure people are safe, environment safe, and then if we can, keep the facility up and running. And again, I, as the cybersecurity person, can't make that determination. I have to work with the engineers, the people that operate and maintain the facility. I have to work with those people to understand what we're able to do safely, and if we need to shut things down. And that's, again, it goes back to, we have to get both people, both sides of the house talking with each other. And then at the same time, we have to really encourage people from the IT side of the house to understand OT and learn like an engineer, which is kind of what I've always been focused on. And we have to get the people on the OT side to think, IT cybersecurity. So that way, over time, we have people that understand both sides. But those people are very few and far between these days. So I like to think I'm getting better every day, but I still have a lot to learn, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we all
Each,
do,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The beauty of this map, and yesterday I was talking to you, you also mentioned this, and then I really like this perspective that the solutions on the OT, they are dynamic, and each plant you visit, you learn something. How are the people, the culture that is there, versus how is the system that they're being used. You will find
Yep.
different integrator, different vendors, different OEMs, and it will all give you a different flavor of understanding. And that makes this
Ex-
job a little bit more challenging, but yeah, exciting as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that was but what we had touched on a little bit was it's why I love my job because I get to work in so many different environments and so many different sectors. Because I could be in a power plant one day and an LNG facility the next, and I haven't been into any mines yet. All those discussions are always online. So one day,
Yeah.
but in a train yard or just in a refinery. I mean, but every environment is completely different and it's that's again it's why we have to be able to talk with each other, and I always really appreciate those people that are willing to have those conversations, because not everybody in OT wants to talk with IT, and not everybody in IT wants to talk with OT. And I don't even consider myself IT anymore, but I'm not 100% OT, either because I'm not an engineer. I don't know. It's kind of interesting place to
Yeah.
to be.
Mike, so this, I know, how do this, IT team and OT team members work together in an emergency situation or maybe some urgent incident? So how do
Yeah, I
you?
mean, I mean, that goes back to, we were mentioning most important thing is preparation. So hopefully, right, you've got IT and OT already talking, right, and working together. The best thing I've ever seen, and this is one thing I saw immediately when I went to my first SANS, when I took the SANS, the GICSP course like 10, 11 years ago, right? I saw, like, I was there as an IT person, and there were a bunch of IT people in the room, but there were actually more OT people in the room, right? And it was like I started talking with the guy who was sitting next to me. He's a PLC programmer for, if I remember right, he was working in water, right? And starting to talk with just different people. Somebody was actually from Los Alamos, right? uh, and so you start talking with different people, and that's where immediately it just clicked for me. It's like, wow, you have the IT people, and we're sitting in the same room as the engineers where we've never really talked to them. And it's like, it's just like when we get on the phone, right? It's this is like when Shiv and I were talking the other day. It's like I'm sitting in the middle of the U.S., Shiv's in India, and then we just, we've touched base on LinkedIn, but you jump on a call and it's all matter, all of a sudden, like there's a connection, right? It's just two people, right, having a conversation, and that's IT and OT. You just got to get people in the same room to actually just start to talk to each other, right? Look at those things you have in common, and that's why I always talk about IT and OT. There are more commonalities than there are where they're very similar, and sure, they're very different at the same time, but there's more things in common than they're not. um, I think the people that are old school OT cybersecurity that are kind of come across as the grumpy old men, it's called the grumpy old man in the community. It's they see it the other way around, right? That OT is completely different, and they don't want anybody else playing in their sandbox. And we're not going to win. You can talk about IT side of the house, OT side of the house. The whole point is we're in the same house, and so we have to work together. So if you can get your people together, I've had a lot of great training great success doing training, especially at floor, getting just like with SANS, right? We get our IT people, we get our OT people. So we have IT people from DBAs and sysadmins and developers in the same class as our control system engineers, our electrical engineers. We have, telecom, operators from folks, people doing maintenance. We get them all in the same class and get them. Again, it's not just about coming to listen to Mike, talk for 40 hours. It's watching them, in the channels and talk to amongst each other and learn from each other. It's to me, it's the best thing you can do. It really is amazing. So, but so yeah, hopefully that answers the question. So yeah, I picked that up. But like I said, that was when I first went to that very first SANS class, it was the one thing that was immediately obvious, and I was like, you know what, this is a beautiful thing. and you don't have to pay $10,000 a class per person to do that, right? You could do it for free at your own organization, other than everybody's time and but so. So yeah, there is a slide in here, going back to the slides talking about, and this, again, I mentioned earlier, in the United States, this is evolving a lot more. And I know, especially if you're in Europe or other parts around the world, you might have no reporting requirements today if there's an incident or a breach. Most OT environments in the United States, they're privatized, they're owned, by private companies. They're not run by the government, and there's very little regulation outside of power. Up until Colonial Pipeline, the only regulation we had in OT for the United States was around power. So if you were in water, rail, mining, refineries, right, chemicals, life sciences, there was none, right? Where now, since Colonial Pipeline, we at least have regulations for pipeline operators, which makes sense, and then for rail, because of course rail is going to be the way to supplement or be that fail-safe backup for pipelines. And so we have more regulations, and there's more coming, like potentially with like chemicals and refineries. But you understand, wherever you are in the world, depending on your environment, if you have an incident, right, then how do you report that? Who do you report it to? A lot of environments have different reporting structures. Email addresses, phone numbers, so certain people that from your side have to make that contact, and then understand, well, what happens when this person is on vacation, not available, or they left the organization 2 months ago, right? What do you do? You don't want to get into trouble with the government, at least. So but also involve the lawyers. So which is always interesting conversations, because most lawyers always try to find a way of getting out of reporting. I mean, it's just true, right? So
Yeah.
it's nothing to get they're doing their job, right? So completely understand. So, but hopefully, I think, especially that's in the ICS OT world, hopefully you work in an organization that understands, when, especially if there's substantial risk, especially to the public, that information is reported appropriately. That should never be put in question. So, but yeah, make sure you understand those reporting requirements, and especially the timelines, because now you start seeing 24 hours, 40, 72 hours, and if you don't report within that time frame, there could be substantial penalties. So you want to make sure to understand what those requirements are. But just wanted to throw that out there. But
Yeah, that's very important point that you have touched, Mike. And there are a bunch of questions already people are putting on this side. There is like questions about how is this reporting is going to be impacted when NIS2 directives will be implemented uh, in different geographies. So, do you have any insight on this? Maybe I'll just place this question because this makes sense to take this question here. Um, Ravindra has asked this question. Due to the upcoming NIS2 and other regulatory requirements, reporting incidents would need to be in timely manner. He wants to hear your thoughts.
yeah, I think that was what we were just really touching on. I think for me, the key is so understand what those requirements are, right? So if it's 24 hours, 72 hours, if it's 3 months, right, you just understand what it is, and then understand that you should go through the appropriate channels within your company or your organization before reporting, which includes a main focus on legal, and then understand that legal process is going to take time. And a lot of times they might not understand, and I've seen this in a lot of different organizations over the years, that the lawyers aren't in any rush. So if you have an incident, let's say on Monday at 8 a.m., and you're supposed to report within 72 hours, it could be weeks later and they're still thinking about whether they need to report or not, right? Which is not a situation you want to be in. So part of your going back to preparation and your training, you need to get legal involved ahead of time so they understand those requirements, and when an incident happens, you don't have weeks or months to think about it. It's you have hours, if maybe a day or two, before you can make that decision on whether you need to report or not. So I think that's get the lawyers involved, get them involved in your planning, get them involved in your training. So that way it's not a surprise when something happens and then you're asking them, hey, do we, can we disclose? Because you're supposed to, ask them, are we allowed to disclose? And then, have them take forever to make that decision. It happens almost every time. So
Yeah. So I'm looking in the timer. So I'm just moving ahead with the.
I know, sorry, I talk forever.
And people love to hear from you. I just see some comments and people are directly pointing questions towards you. Want to hear Mike's thoughts on this? Maybe we'll finish up the slides quickly and then dedicate some time for the questions as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So, I want to make sure. I think one of the key aspects for it's nothing special, but it's in environments, especially if you don't have resources to do response, then you need to make sure that you already have an established relationship with an outside provider, whether it's Mandiant, Drake. Like if you're in the United States, right, you're working with Dragos. If you're not working with Dragos, you're working with Mandiant. If you're not working with, there's a Mandiant, there's a few boutique shops. So wherever you're in the world, have that provider available, right? And that you have an existing relationship, even more so, you would have a retainer. So that way, when an incident happens, you don't have to spend 2 weeks doing paperwork like master service agreements and non-disclosure agreements. And it's you just want to be able to call them and say, hey, I need your help. Help me now. Right? You don't have to fill out forms for 2 weeks. Some organizations also do what they call a zero cost retainer, which means, again, you get all the paperwork done. And then if you have an incident, you can call them and they'll usually be there within 4 hours. Awesome. That's what you need. Having a retainer that you pay for means you're paying up front. And so you might pay, let's say, 10,000 US a year to have that retainer, which means like if we had, let's say, Dragos come on site, it might cost, and these are just general numbers. So you'd have to check with a salesperson to make sure these are, but let's say, we might pay them $300 an hour with a retainer we pay $10,000 a year for. If you don't have that retainer, if you have like a zero cost retainer, then you could pay $400 an hour. But again, doing a zero cost retainer, no, it doesn't save you necessarily the money. It saves you, again, the time having to do the paperwork, which you do not have the time to do when you're in the middle of an incident, especially in an OT environment.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, we are saving a lot in the time when we have this agreement in hand. And also, sometimes, like you mentioned, some of the boutique shop in US, but other part of the geographies, it becomes important to identify the people who would be able to support into that area. And specifically with
right.
these providers as well, there might be a specific area of ICS for which
Mm,
expertise would be concentrated with one or two players itself. So you need to
sure.
identify which is the right player to help you in this particular industry. It's very important.
Yep,
Like
definitely.
healthcare, for example, could become lots of issues
Right,
in terms of
exactly.
compliance
Yeah,
issues,
that's why I
legal
was
issues.
just
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I was just thinking you'll have different, players in different sectors that are probably strong, someone that's
Yeah.
more in power versus healthcare versus, refineries, et cetera. Yep, most
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah. So.
And then, yeah, this is what we were mentioning earlier as far as,
Yeah.
Intel. Again, you don't have to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars like we do on Intel. Like I said, I love getting to look at the Intel feeds. I could sit there all day. But at the end of the day, you can Mandy and Dragos and others put so much information out there for free that you can look to see what's going on. I look at other news feeds, LinkedIn, right? Industrial Defender, right, is a great site. More general IT that also covers OT is like Bleeping Computer, if you're familiar with them. That's one of the sites I follow religiously. SANS, the Internet Storm Center, Security Week. Okay, I can see the guy's face. The one guy that focuses on OT security, right? There's some great articles. Again, it's looking out out to see what's going on in the environment. Same thing in IT, right? What attacks are out there? Can they impact my environment? And if they can, well, are we protected against it? Or if not, what do we need to do to protect against it, right? And so, and that's really what we're talking about. You don't have to spend $100,000. You can just go look at the free, news articles on the internet to see what's going on out there, and then understand, again, better how do we, protect against those types of attacks. I think that's one of the great things about LinkedIn is there's so much great information out there. And if you have questions, there's a lot of people out there that would be more than happy to, share their thoughts on, yeah, this is how you protect against this type of attack in an OT environment. So, yeah.
Yeah, yes, very important point that you touched, Mike. And then sometime back you mentioned about our taking the course from RAW ICS 515, and there is a specific section on this consuming threat intel, right? And they have given a bunch of papers, and then one of the exercise that they do in the course is to, in the times of the information is available freely, you mentioned lots of source, it's also very important to consume the information with due diligence. You really need to know what is the source of the information, whether it is really a threat intel or it's a targeted campaign. Sometimes
For
the
sure.
threat intel could be specifically maliciously putting up some information for some specific region or geography. So we really need to be cautious about consuming these uh, intel. But having said that, there are really good resources available now. And somebody in the chat has asked, so I was just pulling previous post of mine. There is this university in US, Temple University, and they gather a lot of data on ransomware attacks. So that's a freely available repository that you can use for maybe understanding what kind of sectors are targeted, how it is growing over the years, and all those kind of information.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we are at the last slide for the discussion, and after this we can take some questions. So would you like to give uh, some key highlights, key points, some references and practices at the uh,
Sure.
yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think you mentioned NIST is another great framework out there, and NIST does not only a lot of great work like with 882 around how to protect OT environments, how to create a cybersecurity program, kind of the if you want the Americanized version of 62443, I guess in a way. But also, NIST also has entire documents on how to create an incident response program. So there's a lot of great NIST materials that are out there. There's, I think you were mentioning, and I'm not as much familiar with or ICS for ICS. I think I had looked at them initially and looked like they were kind of up and coming and getting started. So it looked like they had a lot of great information. If you want to share, with others about that, so it looks like they're kind of starting to release information. I guess that's at least the impression I got from, if that made sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So ICS is really working to come up with the templates, and they are doing lots of mock drill exercises to validate those templates. And the good thing is they would be available for consumption to the people very soon once they release them. There are lots of resources available on their website already. But yeah, this is an evolving field, and then I am participating there. Generally, there is a monthly meeting that happens, and where people will play different roles, similar to a tabletop exercise to validate those templates and other things.
Okay. Yeah. So there definitely, it sounds like they're going to make some resources available.
Yeah,
And then really gets to the last point. And I had a post last week, I think, that I put out there. It's actually one of the carousels I worked on probably way too long on, uh, with lots of pictures from Midjourney. But, really about, I think one of the keys to, going back to preparation, we were talking earlier about, number one, critical, aspect of incident response and planning is that preparation phase. And so you can have an incident response plan, but if you're not practicing it, right? If people haven't gone through, at least walk through that process, when something really bad happens, when you have that worst day ever, then people, they run around like the chicken with their head cut off, and you're not responding effectively. You're not responding as quickly as possible as you should, which means the attackers are going to be able to do that much more damage. And that's not what we want to have happen. So the best way is when you have that plan in place, practice, right? Run those tabletops. Get everyone in the same room, whether, from engineering to cybersecurity to HR to legal, right? So that way they understand what's expected of them when the incident occurs. Again, so everybody knows, right? The lawyers know we're going to be asking you about reporting today, not in 2 weeks, right? Because we only have 24 hours to report this. So yeah, the people on the OT side of the house, they're ready to support. They're ready to work with the IT people, right? That's one of the great things about tabletops, right? It's a learning experience, right? That you're walking through those different scenarios and helping them understand. And I guess I'll say the best thing you can do is use realistic scenarios. So I love doing OT cybersecurity tabletops. The last one I did was for Rail. This was probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and so you get to go into the environment and understand, the IT and the OT side and design a real world scenario. As the attackers, come into the IT environment, are they able to move into the OT? And let's say maybe, a network engineer made a mistake, they misconfigured a firewall, and the attackers were able to move into the OT network, right? What would that look like? And then ultimately, explore that worst case scenario, because rail, and I look at, the realistic scenario or events that have happened in rail. There's been some really fascinating rail events. It was really interesting to really dive into. There was an incident where there was a rail company, a rail operator in the UK, where they had, they had been, I shouldn't laugh, but when they were compromised, the attackers, they took over the email the mailboxes for all the employees, and then they basically took the person responsible for running all the rail operations and used their mailbox to send out an email not only to all of their employees but to all of their customers, saying, we were compromised, by a ransomware group essentially, and if we don't pay them the ransom, they're going to, shut down the trains, we won't be able to operate, they'll release your information. And it basically encouraged the customers to encourage the company to pay the ransom, basically is what it is. So, so that was part of the scenario. So I actually got a screenshot that made it look like, it came from, the person that ran that rail operations. It made it look like they came from their mailbox, right? And then you make it look like there's like a news, that they ended up on the news, and I had like fake Twitter feeds that made it look like, the attack group was the ransomware group was putting out, information from the company that they had stolen, right? So it looks like just like you would see in the real world, and it emulates what we're seeing in the real world for that type of environment. So if you're in a real rail environment, emulate rail incidents. If you're in power, kind of emulate those power incidents. So there's a lot of fun you can have there, and I have the most fun when you see the light come on in people's eyes and they see it, right? When they see the fake Twitter feed, when they see the email, when they see the picture that makes it look like they're on the 6 o'clock news, it really helps them kind of feel, right? They can feel the pressure, not just, talk about it. So I think that's a big part of those tabletops as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
one, one exactly. One of the good thing about tabletops is that people will understand uh, the right roles and responsibility, and the people who can take the key decisions at a time of distress, right? And typically, these OT environments are too much bureaucratic, and the people who are in the operations, they might not reach out to the people who are the key decision makers, and they might not know about them at all. So tabletops will give that confidence, the understanding, and the reachability to the key people who would be the key decision takers. and the decision when gets delayed, it will impact more on the incident response.
Exactly, and that just real quickly that that's one of the roles with the IR team lead is they really act as that person that kind of interfaces between the technical parties that are trying to resolve the issue versus the executives and other leadership that they want an update every 5 minutes, right? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And well, I don't want to go into the room with the engineers and the cybersecurity team to ask them because they're focused, right? So that's the IRT lead acts as that gateway. But yeah, it goes back to getting all of the folks, including the leadership, in the tabletop exercises to help them understand this is what's going to happen. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think this brings to the end of the presentation. We might take few questions. People have posted some questions, and I see one of the good thing about the huddle talks is people do engage in questions and sometimes the feedback on the questions as well by other participants. But let me put some question to the board to take it up.
Sure. Yeah, and if there's any leftover,
Yeah,
folks can feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, or if I can grab them from the chat, I'll try to type some up.
question.
So
Yeah,
for sure.
question to you. Jawur Rahman asks, "Hi Mike, if time permits, can you please share your insight on different ICS monitoring tools like Nozomi, Autorio, or Clarity?"
Sure, yeah. So I typically don't go down the vendor discussions. Um, at least feel free to ping me on the side, and I give you a little bit more of kind of my my thoughts
Yeah,
about
exactly.
particular vendors. I would say, and I don't have any personal experience with Atorio, but Nozomi, Clarity, those are definitely well-known names in the industry. So I think you're definitely going to find a lot of organizations that get a lot of great use of those tools. But especially in OT, I always suggest you need to get two or three providers, talk with them, test them out, put them through the paces. If you're able to do a POC, like if you have a test environment, or at least maybe they have a test environment you can use, right? And get an idea for which one's going to be the best fit for your environment. In a lot of environments, at the end of the day, it comes down to whatever's cheapest. I mean, I know that's horrible to say, but I've been there, right? I've worked in environments where you only have a limited budget, and so you only could afford whatever's the cheapest. So it just depends on your needs. But yeah, get them in your environment if you can, especially in a test environment, not production, or work in their test labs. Figure out what's the best in your environment, usability, right? That's especially, that's kind of a key for a lot of the big players in the space. But can we bring somebody in off the street, put them in a seat, and can they use the tool right away to do the job? So that's where I think like a Clarity or Nozomi really excel, besides the features. So I think there's a lot of overlap, but yeah, get them in your environment, or test them out, and see which one is a better fit for you. That's a question I cannot answer. But you're not going to go necessarily wrong with any of the big names, other than you're going to pay more for those other solutions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, then there is one more question from Ravi. Sharing lessons learned across sectors, organizations is still not matured across organizations. Mike,
No,
how
it's
do you
not.
see that maturing across organizations?
It's a great question. Yeah, Ravindra. Yeah, it's one of those where I say this a lot, especially lately. I realize it's OT cybersecurity reminds me of OT cybersecurity, like, or IT cybersecurity, 10, 15 years ago. And so, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't really hear about a lot of, cybersecurity breaches from OT or from IT. And that's really the case in OT these days. And a big part of that is because people don't talk and they don't share information. And so there are the ISACs out there, right? The information security groups that you can join for your particular sector, that will help, kind of make those connections. So like the ISAC for energy is great. From what I've heard, we don't do a lot of power anymore, so they won't let me in anymore. So that's, that would be one. It just depends on your sector. Try, I would suggest two suggestions. One, join the appropriate ISAC. Now, again, some ISACs are better than others. Some probably aren't even worth the time, honestly. But they try, and I feel bad for saying that because there's people out there really trying. And I would say also, reach out to people in your sector. That's the great thing about LinkedIn, right? Find the people in your sector, even if they're at your competitors, right? I actually talk with people at our competitors all the time, a little bit behind the scenes, right? To understand, it's kind of that agreement that, yeah, we're competitors, but also we work in the same field, we work in the same sector. Let's just have a conversation about, what we're seeing, what types of attacks are we seeing, what are we, protecting against, how are we protecting against those, right? We're not sharing company secrets about, the latest contract we have or client that, we're going after, but just, look at those commonalities and help, just have a conversation on how we can help each other, better our cybersecurity stance. Really is what it comes down to. I think if you reach out to those people, they'll be like, yeah, I would love to have that conversation with you. You just don't see that so a lot. But I think I've always got more benefit just doing that, um, than going to an ISAC meeting. So believe it or not. So it just takes a little bit more work, right? Because you're going to have to go out and coordinate that and bring those people together. So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it's well worth it. Yeah, the people want to have those conversations because they're in the exact same position, right? Nobody talks, nobody shares information, or you can go and you can pay Dragos or Mandiant, right? Lots of money for that type of information, but I'd much rather have again, nothing against them, and again, we're big clients, but I'd much rather have a conversation with somebody who's doing my job at a company similar to mine in the same sector as mine than just pay for an Intel feed. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, hopefully. So we can't get the feedback, but yeah, I'll wait for the comment from Ravi. Then there is one very good point which Joseph has raised is alarm
Sure.
rationalization is also a factor here that operators are missing important events due to nuisance alarms. So what do you think
Yeah.
about it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's we see that in IT as well. You see it. It makes me think of if anybody's seen the movie Sneakers. In the beginning where they show the group of essentially pen testers breaking into a bank, right? And it's that classic scenario of setting off the alarm so many times on the door to the security guard just turns it off, right? Considers it a nuisance alarm and so just turns it off completely. So then they can physically break into the into the bank. And so it's really important. And this is, I think, for me, from what I've seen, this is one of those areas where it's really important where you can get OT cybersecurity folks to talk with the IT cybersecurity folks because the IT folks, right, that have been running SIM for 5+ years and have been doing tuning and incident detection and response, they understand this idea of how to tune, right? They understand what to tune, right? What's a nuisance, but also identify, ooh, that might look like it's nuisance, just noise, but it's actually not. It's actually something you need to investigate further. And so you can take the expertise from the IT team members that have been doing this for years and bring that into OT. It just remember that you have to have those conversations because the IT folks come into OT and they don't understand what they're looking at first. And then you have to have those conversations. Oh yeah, this is an HMI. You use it to control this PLC. This PLC, right, controls this thing in the real world that does something, right? You have to explain that to them. And then once you explain it to them and you can have those conversations, then you get a better picture of how to tune those systems in OT. So like if you're using SIM, you're able to more accurately tune out yes, this is noise. It's just nuisance alarms. Let's tune it out so we can better focus on what's going to let us know that there is an attack in the environment, or at least there's something strongly suspicious that we need to investigate. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then there is a compliment for you, Mike. Jigar has said a great conversation. So now we are almost
I
consumed
appreciate that.
15 minutes more than our scheduled 1 hour time. And I like your experience speaks, and you really like to talk about the subject very well. And people were really excited about this session. So before I close, Manjunath, anything from your side, any closing notes or some question to Mike?
Yeah.
That's the
So
opportunity.
yes, thanks, Mike. Definitely,
Thank you.
first of all, thanks for taking time to share your knowledge with us, and looking forward to many more such enlightening session, I can say, interactions in the future. So
Yeah,
definitely
definitely.
people would have gained a lot from this session.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, thanks, Manju, and thanks, Shiv, for having me on. Thanks to everybody for coming along for the ride. Like I said, I know I talk way too long and did not get to everything. But if you have questions, just ping me on LinkedIn. You can see me. I'm always there. So definitely find me there, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions and have those side conversations for sure.
Okay, yeah. Thanks again, Mike, for joining us today, and thanks for your time. This was really enlightening discussion, and I see lots of comments still left unaddressed, but yeah, I will take them offline. So this was OT Security Huddle episode 5, and we have been doing this for some time now. If you really want to watch these episodes again, they are available as LinkedIn Live, rewatch, as well as YouTube channels. So please go and watch there. We would also like to hear your comments, so please post your comments about the sessions on the event page or Auto Security Huddle, or maybe a direct comment to Mike or anyone of us. This will give us encouragement to do more such sessions. So good evening again, everyone. Had a nice day ahead, or in the if you are other part of the world. So have a nice rest of your evenings. See
Yeah,
you
as always.
in 2 weeks again. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. All right. Have a good one. Thanks, kid. Take care.